Tonight, we're investigating a case where security alarms blared through an empty, locked building. Police raced to the scene, doors sealed, no one inside. But security cameras told a different story. They captured something moving outside, a ghostly shape in the dead of night, at the exact moment the alarms were triggered. To this day, the staff who were there refuse to explain what they truly felt that night. What did they see? What did they hear? And why are they so afraid to talk about it? The story begins in the historic heart of Portsmouth, New Hampshire. A popular downtown restaurant, known for its charm and history, was closing up for the night, just like any other evening. The staff went through their routine, tables cleaned, chairs stacked, doors locked, and the motion sensor alarms armed. The building fell silent. At precisely 1:17 a.m., the alarm company's monitoring center received an alert. A motion sensor had been triggered inside the front entryway. Before they could even process the first signal, a second one came through, this time from a sensor deeper inside the building, near the main dining room. As per protocol, the security cameras automatically activated, their lenses scanning the dark, empty rooms. When the manager and a few staff members arrived to review the footage with the police, they expected to see a glitch, maybe a mouse, or a curtain moved by the ventilation system. Instead, they saw something that made no sense. The interior cameras showed nothing. Absolutely nothing was moving. But the exterior camera, pointed across the empty street, captured something impossible. It wasn't a car's headlights. It wasn't an animal. It was just something. A formless, silent presence moving through the night. And all the while, the alarms inside continued to scream, signaling an intruder that no one could see. Police arrived within minutes, conducted a thorough search, and found nothing. The building was secure, untouched. The mystery had just begun. To understand what might have happened, you have to understand the building itself. This restaurant isn't just any old place. It operates within one of Portsmouth's oldest surviving structures, with a history stretching back centuries. Before it served food and drinks, it served many other purposes. It was a home for merchants, a temporary residence for sailors passing through the bustling port, and a stopover for weary travelers. History tells us that life in colonial Portsmouth was harsh. Brutal winters and devastating disease outbreaks were common. Local historians and old town records speak of deaths occurring in the boarding rooms that once occupied the floors above the current restaurant. And then there are the rumors, the stories that have been whispered down through generations. Tales of a network of hidden tunnels connecting the basements of these old buildings to the waterfront, used for smuggling or for secret passage. While many official reports from that era were either sealed for privacy or simply lost to time, the undocumented history lives on in local lore. Long before this single incident, staff members who worked the late shifts often spoke quietly amongst themselves about strange occurrences. The distinct sound of footsteps on the floorboards upstairs, long after everyone had gone home. The soft click of a door latching shut in an empty room. And most unnervingly, the feeling of a pocket of cold air moving past them in a sealed, draft-free space. These experiences weren't just feelings or sounds. Employees started noticing physical things. A bartender would set up glasses in a perfectly straight line at closing, only to find one or two slightly shifted by morning. Kitchen staff, cleaning up late at night, would hear what sounded like the faint scrape of a chair, or the clink of silverware coming from the completely empty dining area. The feeling of being watched became so persistent for some that they outright refused to work alone after midnight. One dishwasher swore he saw a dining chair slide out from a table on its own, just a few inches, when no one was anywhere near it. Another server mentioned that the motion sensors would sometimes act up during thunderstorms, triggering when the power flickered. But when management reviewed the security logs over the years, the patterns of these false alarms didn't line up with electrical glitches. The triggers were often sequential, moving through the building in a logical path. Publicly, The management dismissed most of these stories as overactive imaginations or the creaks and groans of an old building settling. But privately, the scheduling told a different story. It became an open secret that certain employees were never, ever given a late-night solo shift. Something was happening in that building, and everyone who worked there knew it. Inside the restaurant, the cameras showed absolutely nothing. The rooms were still, silent, and empty. Yet, the alarm logs told a terrifyingly different story. The sensors were triggered in a perfect sequence. First, the front hallway. Then, the main dining room. A few seconds later, the back storage area. The pattern of alerts strongly suggested something was walking through the building, following a clear and deliberate path. But again, the cameras captured nothing. Then there's the footage from outside. The mist-like shape that drifted slowly across the street. It had no discernible features, no sound, and cast no reflection in the wet pavement. Skeptics offered logical explanations. It was fog from the nearby waterfront, steam rising from a manhole cover, a strange distortion of light from a distant source. But none of these theories fully explained its contained shape or its steady, directional movement, which coincided perfectly with the internal alarms. Was it just a series of bizarre coincidences? Or was the camera capturing the external presence of whatever was invisibly moving through the inside of the restaurant? In the aftermath, the story exploded. Paranormal investigators from all over the country began contacting the restaurant, eager to get inside. Some experts proposed that certain types of entities or energies can interact with and trigger electronic sensors without being visible to the human eye or a standard camera lens. They can manipulate electromagnetic fields, causing the alarms to go off. Others suggested more terrestrial explanations, like low-frequency vibrations from underground, or drastic localized temperature shifts, causing the passive infrared sensors to activate. But one detail remained the most chilling: the path. The alarms weren't triggered randomly. They were triggered in a sequence, as if something had entered through the front, walked through the dining room, and proceeded toward the back of the building. The alarms had gone off in the past, but never in such a specific, sequential pattern, and never with corroborating video evidence of a strange anomaly outside at the exact same time. But perhaps the most telling piece of evidence is the silence. The employees who were there that night, the ones who reviewed the footage and walked through the building with the police, have become incredibly reluctant to discuss the event. Their public statements are vague, but their private fear is palpable. The investigation, both by paranormal groups and online sleuths, continues. But there are whispers that not all of the security recordings from that night were released to the public. What else did the cameras see? What did the staff really experience that made them so afraid to speak? The full story of what happened in that Portsmouth restaurant may never be told. Just when you thought the story of the waterfront warehouse was over, it turns out the viral footage was only the beginning. Some staff members claim the activity never stopped. In fact, they say it got worse. So much worse that several employees walked out and never came back. What really happened after the cameras stopped rolling? Tonight, we're going back inside. Weeks after the strange video clip spread across the internet, workers at the facility started noticing things. Small things at first, easily dismissed. The heavy door to the main storage room, always locked at closing, would be found slightly ajar in the morning. Security lights outside would flicker randomly, with no apparent cause. Inside, objects left on shelves would be shifted just a few inches overnight. It was unsettling, but everyone tried to find a rational explanation. Maybe the night crew was being careless. Maybe there were power surges. But then, the disturbances escalated. One employee, tasked with reviewing the security footage each morning, started seeing things that made his blood run cold. He claimed that just before the motion sensor lights would kick on, dark, Indistinct shadows seemed to dart across the frame. Another worker reported that internal alarms were being triggered in sealed-off sections of the building, even when the exterior sensors showed no breaches. Management chalked it all up to system sensitivity. They called in technicians to run diagnostics, expecting to find faulty wiring or software glitches. But the technicians found nothing. The system was working perfectly. The alarms were being triggered by something real. The question was, what? As word of the ongoing issues started to leak out, it caught the attention of a local paranormal investigation group. They had seen the original viral video and were intrigued by the new reports. After some negotiation, management, desperate for answers, granted them access to the building after closing hours. The team arrived armed with a full spectrum of ghost hunting equipment, EMF meters, thermal cameras, audio recorders, and more. What they found was far more than they bargained for. Almost immediately, their instruments began to react. As they walked through the long, empty hallways, they recorded sudden, dramatic temperature drops in specific areas, a classic sign of paranormal presence. Their electronic equipment started malfunctioning without reason. Batteries drained in seconds, cameras would shut off, and their walkie-talkies were filled with static and strange interference. One investigator, monitoring audio through a set of noise-canceling headphones, swore he heard faint, raspy whispers, though he couldn't make out the words. Another member of the team, standing completely alone in the center of the main storage area, reported feeling a sudden, intense pressure on his back, as if someone was standing right behind him. When he spun around, there was nothing there. The team conducted their investigation for several hours, documenting every strange occurrence. But their full report was never officially released to the public. Only a few cryptic fragments and blurry photos ever made it online, sparking even more speculation. When reporters tried to contact members of the team for comment, most refused to speak about the night. A few simply said the location had an energy they had never encountered before, and that they would not be returning. The new wave of activity at the warehouse breathed life back into old local legends. Stories that had been passed down for generations in the waterfront community. People started talking about the area's dark history again. They spoke of sailors whose ships were lost in the thick coastal fog. Their bodies never recovered. They whispered tales of laborers who died during the construction of the harbor itself, their accidents forgotten by time. These old stories insisted that restless spirits still lingered near the water's edge, unable to move on. Locals would share accounts of seeing shadowy figures walking along the docks late at night, only to vanish into the mist. They talked about apparitions that followed empty streets and appeared near the old historic buildings, always late and always silent. For the first time, people started to wonder if the strange events at the warehouse weren't just a modern problem, but part of something much, much older. Was the building sitting on ground that was already haunted? But the most disturbing claim came from a former staff member who quit shortly after the paranormal investigation. He agreed to speak, but only privately, away from any cameras or recorders. He was still visibly shaken. He told a story about one particular night, just before he resigned. He and a few other employees were working late, trying to finish up inventory. Suddenly, a motion sensor in a distant, unused section of the upper floor was triggered. They all stopped what they were doing, listening. The building was supposed to be empty besides them. They checked the security monitor. The alarm was real. Thinking it might be a transient who had somehow slipped in, they decided to search the building together. They moved cautiously, floor by floor, room by room. They found nothing. No broken windows, no unlocked doors, no one hiding in the shadows. But as they stood on the ground floor, they all heard it. The distinct sound of footsteps from the floor directly above them. A slow, heavy tread, pacing back and forth. They raced back upstairs, their hearts pounding. But the rooms were empty. The corridor was silent. Yet, as soon as they returned downstairs, the alarms started blaring again, this time from a different section. This went on for nearly an hour. alarms triggering, footsteps from empty rooms, and a growing sense of dread. The worker said he resigned a few days later. He couldn't handle the stress, the feeling of being watched. When asked what he thought it was, he refused to speculate. He just said one thing, his voice barely a whisper: "We weren't alone." So, what is really going on at the waterfront warehouse? Was it all just a series of coincidences? The fog playing tricks on the cameras? A system glitch that multiple technicians somehow missed? Or is there something unseen passing through that building? Something that can trigger alarms, move objects, and leave grown men terrified? The police officially closed the case as a series of false alarms. But the footage, both the original and the new leaked fragments, remains online. It's debated, analyzed, and argued over by thousands. For the people who worked there, the debate is over. The staff who remain still lock the doors very carefully each night. They double-check the alarms, because sometimes they still go off. It makes you wonder, if something can walk through a locked building without being seen, if it can leave its mark without ever showing its face, what else is walking unseen all around us? Some of the footage from that night remains unreleased. The paranormal team's full report was sealed, and the former employees are still too scared to talk. Perhaps some truths are better left unknown. Thanks for joining us for another tale. If you want more stories that will keep you up at night, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Every story is a new nightmare. See you next time.